Okay, welcome back, folks. Okay, commissioners, we're going to begin. I think the first thing we need to deal with is just a bit of a housekeeping issue, which is FOIL. As you know, we've gotten some FOIL requests for information, which is a very important part of the law, but obviously we're not really equipped to respond as volunteers on the commission in different places. So I think my proposal would be, and obviously it's open, is that we ask the Department of State to help us process FOIL and serve as the FOIL officer, appeals officer, because we don't really have the capability of doing it, in my view.
I'd have to second that, and I think it needs to be clear in our request to the Department of State that we need a FOIL officer and an appeals officer explicitly named, so that we can send it to media and those that would make the FOIL requests.
Yeah, I'm in favor, so, yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Yay, motion carries. Okay.
Okay.
Unanimously.
What I think is what we've got
Madam Chair?
a lot.
No.
Madam Chair, wait, hold on.
I'm sorry?
On the existing issues, one issue we didn't discuss that I think we have to resolve is the issue of indexing.
Yeah.
And we've set for certain numbers. My personal position is that if there are to be changes in these numbers over time, that's up to the legislature to do.
Yeah.
We've seen what happens with automatic indexing, and it's sort of, there are no controls on it. So I would move that our numbers explicitly provide that there is no indexing.
I'm okay.
I
I
agree with
don't,
that.
of course, the legislature's free to change it.
No indexing.
Absolutely are.
Okay, was that seconded? Yes? Yeah. And do we all, thank you.
That's fine.
Or wait, we
Wait,
haven't voted.
Wait,
Oh, we're discussing.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
You want a mic?
My only question is, the indexing applies to not just candidates, but party committees. Are we saying we're striking indexing from all? And if so, how do you deal with the indexing?
Is there indexing to party committees? Then we can't.
Yeah, I think the party committee in statutory law is probably at like $25,000, and obviously, you know, the contribution limit is closer to $120,000. If you get rid of the indexing, which I'm supportive of, I just want to raise that, how we deal with it.
Can I
Just
just-
ignore it?
That's not within our purview.
That's what I'm asking.
That's
I'm
not
asking
within
the question, just ignore it.
We're talking about no indexing on the numbers that we have proposed in the campaign finance statute, not in any other provision of election law.
But since we haven't decided on the governor statewide, actually the statewide number yet, shouldn't we wait before we make this?
I think that's a good time. Let's just wait till we do that and then do it. I agree with it in principle, Henry. So I think everybody's comfortable in principle. Let's just see how it plays out on that number, and then we'll take that up. Good.
Indexing tabled.
And again, I don't know that we have to decide it at this moment, but I'm hoping that we can, I'd like us to discuss the progressive match that I think we pretty much all agree on. I mean, maybe not all, but a lot agree on consensus on. But I think that the cap for the gubernatorial is way too high. I'm sorry.
The finance, you're talking about the public finance cap.
The public finance cap was way too high. I thought
It was
$18 million, and I think that just, it looks obnoxious, frankly. And that's a huge amount of money. I know it's every 4 years, but I think that number should come down to $10 million. So again, I'm not asking for a vote on it now. I'm just letting you know that that's a position that I'd like to advance with the committee. And take a look at the entire, I want to wait to see the entire, package as to what this thing is going to cost in a preliminary sense, before we knock into that.
Sorry.
But I think that does need to be looked at.
What about the public finance caps for the other for Senate and Assembly?
I think they were good. I mean, I think they were fine at the moment where we had them. I don't see that as a real problem, but, we'll see. But I just do want to see what the dollars end up looking at. I would say to you, watching the dollars of this whole thing and the taxpayer money aspect of it is something that, we have to pay attention to as well. we want to build a phenomenal program, and I think we are, frankly. I take a look at, even some of the things that we've been talking about today really are excellent. But we also have to be mindful of the fact, and this is why, I stress this with the threshold that we settled on. I'm not looking to revisit it. But I just want, in the whole context of things, everything that, you're going to hear, at least from me, and I'm sure from other members here, is that we have to design a system that functions well. And while at the one hand, we want to encourage real, meaningful competition and candidates in districts with grassroots support to come up and campaign and have the resources to campaign, we want these people to be credible. And we want them to be, in my judgment, running from credible parties that, have earned some respect, in essence, of the electorate by having some support. You're going to be hearing from me a number of times, and I look at the gubernatorial race and the cap and the money. Let's watch for the taxpayer too, so that when we present this, it gains the support of taxpayers, that they think this is, for whatever shortcomings others may feel, they feel this is a good use of their money, and it's not going to go to waste. And I'll talk further about that. You want to talk a little bit about the progressive match?
Sure.
I mean, that's, again, on a consensus basis. Is there discomfort of anybody on the progressive match? Is there a lack of understanding on it? It was built on the concept of trying to compensate for the in-district limitation that has gotten a lot of attention and some measure of criticism from some folks that I don't think, I don't agree with, frankly, and I could explain why. But the progressive match was done so as to magnify the small contributions from people far beyond what the 6-to-1 match that advocates have been laying out there as the minimum they want to see. And in particular, what I like about it, and I think Henry modified it appropriately so, to 3 levels, and I think it probably should read 3 levels. The first 50, 12 times the amount. The next 100, 9 times the amount, same effect. And the last 100, 8 times the amount. It's the same thing. It just cuts down from 5 levels to 3, but it does the same thing. And that way, what you're doing is you're taking people who don't have the loudest voice and you're magnifying it significantly. A person who only can give $10 is going to see a significant increase to that $10 contribution. And you are also overall taking the full $250 and giving it a multiple of 9.2. And I'd like to also point out that we decided early on to settle at $250 as the maximum matchable contribution, which was well ahead of the $175 now currently used in the city system. So, I think it's a good system. I think it is a progressive match, and I think it does meet the objectives that the legislature set forth when establishing this commission.
You ready?
Yeah.
So Jay, let me just ask you, I've gotten a couple thousand emails, or maybe 4 emails, a couple thousand times, all asking only that we go for 6-to-1, just 6-to-1. Are you saying that we should get ahead of the public on this?
I have enjoyed those many emails myself, and you're right, and the cut and paste nature of them, was clear to me. But I did listen and read, the first one of each one that I got, and I respect the fact that there are people behind those. But what folks have to understand is, as I see it, there is no magic formula here. There is no, set path that makes this right. We're going to improve the world as it relates to campaign finance. It will not be perfect. It will not be to someone's exact specific view. But this in particular, this match in particular, I think dramatizes, our belief in these small dollar donations, and magnifying them the way they do. I think we exceed those thousands of recommendations that have come our way. Did you get all of the thank you emails that I've been getting?
I haven't gotten those yet.
Neither have I. Okay. There you go. Go
On the match side, the progressive match, I wasn't really in favor of it before, and now I'm especially not in favor of it. My recollection was, we were at 6-1. Then we said we're limiting to in-district only. And then we said, well, if it's in-district only, there's not going to be sufficient dollars within the district to draw down for someone to participate. So then we said, well, let's do a progressive match to account for that. But then today, we equalize the contribution limits for participating and non-participating. Everyone's going to participate or attempt to. And if the justification now is the amplification of the small dollar donor and not to compensate for the limitation on in-district, out-of-district matches, why isn't the governor and the other statewides on a progressive match system? So again, we just keep creating inconsistencies in our rationale, and that's my only concern that I have.
Well, no, that's reasonable. The reason is that in the gubernatorial, the lieutenant governor for the primary anyway, and AG and comptroller, they have access to the whole state. It's only statewide. In other words, you can't go out of state, but it is statewide. And the opportunities are larger. The progressive was recommended for implementation when we narrowed the universe that candidates could go to, and thus we needed to magnify the match amount so they could meet their qualifying total cap, the total cap dollars, which was what we were worried about. And I think that in the gubernatorial, I think they'll meet that.
No, I know,
Okay.
Go ahead,
your
John.
proposals, I want to address your proposal, which you're probably going to do, so why don't you do it?
That's what I was gonna do. Thank you. So, as I referenced earlier, I think my biggest concern here is that the contribution limits are still, this is super loud, sorry, are still way too high. If we're gonna say that we're gonna match the first, match up to the first 250 of what did we say? What did the majority agree on? $2,500 contribution in the primary and $2,500 contribution in the general for the assembly, then $5,000 for the Senate. That is a very high dollar threshold that we're going to match. Someone gives a $5,000 contribution. If we're matching the first 250 of that, that doesn't solve the problem of getting big money out of politics or incentivizing certain types of donations respectfully. So that's my first challenge. So still, if at the end of the day we're going to be held accountable for making sure that we're designing a good system and really incentivizing small donations, I wasn't in support of this, what do we call it, progressive match to begin with, because I really don't think, as we know in the city system, there are districts that vary wildly in AMI, and it works there without the progressive match. So I put that aside to kind of respond to and react to what was already on the table. I think if we're still saying that there are districts that really need help, if we are not going to allow outside contributions, there's no one else there giving them the resources they need to run a viable campaign. So I'm going to put back on the table that we should have some level of match on the contributions for those outside of the districts to make sure that people can still run competitive campaigns. In my proposal, I said at least the first $100 should be matched 4-1 for outside of the district to make sure that people can actually run a viable campaign.
I just wanted to clarify, there's some difference of opinion, I'll call it that, because it's about opinion. It's not about, actual fact, I think, as to the benefits or costs of in-district versus out-of-district and why. The way I look at in-district, you have multiple, testimony here, by the way, we've had multiple, and I have it, I wrote it out, multiple individuals who have said that the importance of this program is to allow candidates and incumbents to focus on their own constituents in fundraising and not to have to worry so much about fundraising. It's about constituents. It's about grassroots. The other thing I think that isn't stated, and we have to be careful here, is that you have a lot of low-income districts. And if you allow out-of-district fundraising to be matched, the difficulty you have is this. You're going to see a lot of money flowing, I think a lot more money, I should say, flowing from wealthier, very often white districts into less wealthy, poorer districts of color. You're not going to see it many times that districts of color are going to be having high donor amounts flowing in the other direction. And it's not that it's a racial matter, it's an economic matter. And we have to take a look at the fact that there really is a policy issue about having wealthier districts and donors in wealthier districts having a matchable impact. That doesn't say they can't donate, because you can. It's just the taxpayer's not going to magnify any portion of those donations in those districts to magnify their impact. That's the rationale that underlies a lot of this, is that, where does that out-of-district money come from typically? Well, typically, it doesn't come from other poor districts. It typically comes from, some rather wealthier people that bring the money in. I think I read somewhere in one of the reports that if you looked at the state Senate campaigns in the last campaign, I think it said that 10% of the money came from out of state, 50% of the money came from out of district, and 40% of the money came from in district already. And that's without even trying, and that's without even the match. So, I read Professor Malbin's report, his report of November the 8th, which I thought was very encouraging. And his biggest criticism, he felt that there were opportunities to double the number of donors in each of the districts. Much harder, but certainly doable, to make it 3 times the number by what we were doing, which would definitely satisfy a good chunk of the issue. His problem, of course, was with the threshold, and I believe with what we did today in our recommendations dealt with that. Just so you know, if you take $175,000, which is the cap I believe that we had set for the assembly, right, for the primary and the assembly, I think it was $175,000. Am I right?
Yeah.
If you take that and divide it by 9.2, which is the 250 match,
I think
okay?
it was 350 for the assembly.
But that's for both.
For both, the
Right,
primary,
I'm talking about the
yeah.
primary, let's say the primary. You need to raise $19,000 to get to your total cap. That's what it comes to, divided by 9.2, Every dollar is times 9.2, up to 250. So, if we take a look at that, and you divide, I mean, it's simple math, but, you take 19,021, and you divide that by $250, you're looking at 76 donors, really. So, I mean, in that formulation of how you look at it, at the maximum amount, of course. If it's lower dollar amounts, they're going to be magnified a bit more, but you need a bit more of them. We're not talking about something in district that is that impossible. I mean, it sounds it on the one level. You look at some numbers, it looks so terrible, but when you're talking about 76 people giving $250, okay, that's 150 some odd people giving $125. And you could do the math, keep going back. And I just think that, yes, it's going to be difficult, but if you're looking to be in a system and getting matched dollars, you got to work. You got to get on the phones. You got to have, get-togethers and what have you. So I think we've reached something really very good here, and that's the reason for it. But again, I'm filibustering, so.
And Jay, I just want to add to that, we're not precluding out-of-district contributions. We're just not using taxpayer funds to match anyone's contribution that is not a constituent of that elected official. So the person, if they're participating, is free to still procure outside or out-of-district contributions. They're just not going to be matched.
So if I give, 200 to Kim's district in South Silver Springs, it will just be that. It won't be 400 or 600.
I see a couple different elements on this. One is that we're creating a program with the intent and I think the effect of changing behavior. And I think one of the things we looked at, perhaps it was in Professor Malvin's report, is that the city, the number of contributors in the city districts for the city council is twice what they are comparatively for the state districts where there is no matching fund program. Having a matching fund program promotes additional contributors, which is why I think he concluded that a program like this could result in twice as many contributors as is currently the case. And we certainly want to encourage candidates to be interacting with the people within their districts. That's what the goal is And, you know, with all due respect to Buffalo, you know, we don't need Buffalo influencing
And we
campaigns
feel
in the
same-
Bronx.
We feel the same way. We don't want downstate influencing our elections.
And we don't need Russia influencing our elections either, and, you know, and we should take care of that also. But, look, the bare bones that we have framed now certainly do a lot to encourage small contributors, do a lot to encourage contributions within the district, and while we're not taking big money, the biggest money out of campaigns, I don't think we ever could, but if we don't do anything, you know, the maximum contribution to a gubernatorial campaign is going to be over $70,000. And whatever we come up with, it's going to be a lot less than that. And, you know, we're bringing it down. Is it perfect? Look, we're not going to come up with a perfect system. Let's be real. I mean, you know, there are lots of different interests, you know, and lots of different competing forces here. But we're making it an awful lot better, and we're really promoting the whole concept of small contributions and enabling, you know, a lot of candidates who otherwise couldn't participate to participate. You know, as somebody said, on one of the issues, this is a fair compromise. Well, I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a fair compromise, a system that will actually work.
So here's a suggestion, and it's not mine, I think it came from the Brennan Center. If we're going to eliminate out-of-district matches, should we even increase the low-dollar matches higher? So instead of 12 to 1, make 15 to 1 for the first 50, 10 to 1 for the next 50, and then coming down to 8 to 1.
The,
15 and 10. 15 for the first 50 and
and that comes
10
out,
for the
does that
next.
come out to 9.8 total? What does it come out to total? Well, give me that again, just give it to me.
15 for the first 50,
Okay, so that's 750, yep.
right.
And then what?
10 for the next 100. So
10
10
for
for
the
the
next
next 50 and 10 for the next 50
10
after
to
that.
100 is 1,000.
So that's,
And then how much for the last 100?
leave it at 8.
8.
$25.50
That's 25.50.
for $250, which is a little over 10.
That's over 10. That's a big
It's 10.2, I think.
10 points. I think, look, I'm amenable to raising it, don't get me wrong on that. But I think we have to be careful when we talk about 10 or more to 1, it's gonna, you know, you're raising some price sensitivity, I think. 25.50 divided by, you're right. Yeah, it's 10.2, you're right. And if you left it 15,
And then 998.
998,
What if
then
you
you'd
do
be
that?
9.8. Look, I don't know that we have to vote on it this exact minute, but I like it. I don't have a problem. I like progressive. I like the lower amount being the one that we magnified. You know, anything we could do to get,
It just seems we're taking all these machinations and jumping through all these hoops when we could say a 6 to 1 match in or out of the district and call it a day.
yes, we are.
But we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that.
Or some of us don't want to
Some
do
of us
that.
don't.
Yeah.
Some of us do.
I mean, it's worked. There's no AMI adjustments in the city.
But it has not worked. It doesn't work all across the board. There's some districts that have elected officials that wasn't voted by the district. And now we're gonna amplify the out-of-district money, so they're gonna continue having an influence on the poorer neighborhoods?
So you don't think that the New York City system should match all of New York City's contributions, just the in-district?
I think it should be based on the AMIs. Or if not, then just keep it in district as we have voted.
Well, now we're doing both.
Well, actually, I'd say that I think that someone, and I'm not from New York City, and I've learned a couple times I've driven to New York City for these meetings that it's a different animal than Buffalo, but someone who lives even in another borough has a vested interest in what's happening in the city. What interest does someone in Saratoga Springs have on the 141st Assembly District in Buffalo?
It could be to decide which fate the House of the Assembly goes. Is it in favor of the conservatives, in favor of the liberals, in favor, I mean.
And I'm all for
I mean,
that. I'm just not in favor of yours being matched, mine.
No, but the state legislature divides creates and legislates for the state. I'm not talking about your city council or
But
your
there are a lot of
town
local
board or
bills,
your
too.
supervisors or.
I mean, all the
My
tax
assembly member's
bills, all
job
the,
is to bring,
there's a ton of local bills.
there are, and her job is to advocate for what's best for her constituents. I'm not opposed to you contributing, for whatever reason. I'm just opposed to
No,
taxpayers'
I'm just saying, now we're at a
funds.
15-1 on 50, when,
We haven't voted that. I'm just
but
saying.
30,000 emails that we've all got and all the experts say 6-1 match statewide makes it work.
I do also think and I appreciate Commissioner Jacobs' points around low AMI districts, having spent a significant portion of my life living in one of those districts. You could also be across the street from another representative who, literally by virtue of living across the street, right, district lines are in some respects artificial, could be influencing what happens in your community.
Absolutely.
And so with a no out-of-district match, you have no ability to help push that forward. I'm gonna do a little bit of my own filibustering over here, respectfully. And I would say, for some of those communities, you mentioned $125 or whatever the amount is, we know, and I'm not gonna quote the stat because I'll get it wrong, but people who live below the poverty line don't have the savings. So they're not gonna choose to allocate the little bit of resources they have towards this. And so I think to the extent that we're not allowing for out-of-district match, you are further putting candidates who live in those districts who want to do good for their communities at a disadvantage, especially when you view, as I started off by saying earlier today, the totality of the package we're describing. So Worcester and high contribution limits are in. We are designing a system that is not going to incentivize viable candidates to participate and be able to have viable campaigns. It's a very different type of candidate that we're all talking about. We're not talking about me, for example. Like, I don't, in a system like this, you're talking about one of the grassroots activists who were here today. Very worthy, but they don't have the same base of people from which to raise money. I want us to be clear about the type of system we're designing and that we're not necessarily solving for all the things that we were appointed to solve for, first among which was to get big money out of politics and actually make the system work. So there is a consequence of not having out-of-district match, and so I appreciate your sensitivity and concern for low AMI districts. I also want to be clear that the people we're talking about in those communities, while they have a vested interest there, may not be able to afford that $120 donation to be able to make sure that their money is being amplified at that higher level.
Well, I respectfully disagree, because even though you might not have $120 to give, if you're giving in 20, and you know that 20 is gonna be matched because you in the district 6 times, you're gonna be incentivized to give the 20 for the person to run in your own district.
12 times if you're in district and you're
12 times.
under 50.
Well, we haven't voted on that.
No, but-
We have not voted on 12.
What we did last time, but that doesn't make a difference. But I think that her out-of-district match proposal, again, was 4-1 on the first 100. So it's significantly less of a voice.
Well, Commissioner Gatachow, you make a good point.
Gatacho.
You make a good point about the person who is outside the district by 1 block may have, concerns, but that person outside the district by 1 block can't vote for that candidate either. I mean, that's the way the system works. You vote for your own representative and you only get 1. And so while I'm not saying you can't donate into the district, what I'm concerned with is, and I'm not concerned with the person across the street as much as I am the person who lives, far away but has a philosophical interest perhaps in a particular candidate, but that candidate may not have the deep connection to the community that we're looking for. And I'm saying that to have wealthy donors, putting up whatever the match is that we came up with, $2,500, $3,000, whatever it is, and having that first $250 matched at let's say we stay at 9.2 to 1, and they're out of district, I think is a mistake. I think that's a mistake, because what you're going to be finding,
But that wasn't her
That wasn't
proposal.
that was my proposal.
That's not her proposal.
I understand, but even if it's 4-1 on $100, why does that get magnified? What's the need to magnify it? I don't find that even in the toughest of circumstances, coming up with $19,000 is what you have to raise to get $175,000. And I don't care how you do it, but it seems to me that with that kind of match proposal, that's not unattainable. Maybe you can't find 76 people in a particular district to give $250 to get you there, but you might be able to find 10 or 20, and then some at $100 and some at $10 and some at $25. And so I think you do get there. But I think the other main thing is this: you don't have people from outside the district, in essence, funding, I won't use the word buying, but that's in there, funding candidates in different districts for whatever their own agenda items are.
Okay, so since we've made up this illusory rule that party committees can't be touched, will the party committees only spend the money they raise out of those districts on those candidates?
Again, that, you say it wasn't illusory. Yeah. I mean, illusory, it's not illusory, it's in the, you know, we don't have the, it's not in our purview, but, you know, go ahead.
You know, one of my concerns as an old political operative from years ago is that fundraising has changed dramatically, particularly in the last cycle or so. And social media fundraising is literally touching a button now. And we've seen it with the, you know, with a couple thousand emails we've gotten, people from all over the state just literally touching a button and flooding each of us with literally a couple thousand emails, which means that it's not hard to put together a campaign where somebody touches a button and somebody gets 1,000 $10 contributions from all over the state who have probably as much awareness of what's going on in that district as the people who are emailing us have awareness of what we're doing.
I agree that is a problem.
If people are still arguing that we should do 6 to 1, they haven't paid attention to what we've been doing for the last 6 weeks. You know, how much attention are they going to pay to the 141st Assembly District when they get an email saying, press this button and, you know, and we'll send $10, and it's going to get matched 12 to 1 or 6 to 1 or 4 to 1. We don't have to provide public matching funds for those contributions. People want to make the contributions, fine, but we don't have to match those contributions, and it's dangerous because it will overwhelm local sentiment and, you know, and local effect. And that's one of my concerns about it. And yeah, it's just changed. I couldn't run a campaign anymore. It's just different.
But what if, so I mean, I think this is complicated because we're also talking about matching a portion of a large contribution. What if we were only talking about matching 4 to 1 out of district for someone who gives $100 only?
Not the first 100, but 100.
100 total.
How do you do it? I give 100 this week, and a week before the election, you know, when nobody else knows what's going on, matching funds are going out, I give another $1,000. I mean, you know.
But that's enforced administration issues that we're going to have regardless.
No, it's not. We don't have a situation of having to claw back money from people who, you know, had something matched that we decide later on shouldn't have been matched. I mean, you know, you can't do that. I mean, you know.
That is a difficult proposition because plus I don't believe you can limit someone's ability to give as much money as they want to a particular candidate within the contribution limit.
But you can limit what's matched publicly for that contribution, right?
Right,
So
but you said only $100 contribution.
would be matched 4 to 1 if it's out of the district.
But you can't say you can,
I'm not saying you can give whatever you want, but I'm saying only $100, like the $100 denomination contribution to Nora Gataccio gives to your campaign. You're running, it's happening. $100, I don't live in your district, but I really care about what happens there. Because I care about you being a person who supports the issues I care about in Albany as a part of a collective and representative body. $100 contribution. I only give it once. Let's even put aside some of the administration issues that is being raised by Commissioner Berger. That contribution could be matched 4 to 1 outside the district.
I guess I don't understand how that would necessarily, I think that everybody's made incredibly valid points, and we are going to just have to make some choices as commissioners. I don't think there's really a solution per se to all of this, because I think if it were me and I'm out of district and I'm going to contribute and I knew that I could write a $100 check and it would get matched 4 to 1, I would do that for 10 people and just write $100. And I'm not somebody who I think, of course I would do it for people I believed in, but I would probably always just give my money anyway, because that's the nature of, I think, me, of who I am. And I don't really think my contributions should be matched in district.
Out of district, out of district.
I mean, out of district, sorry. So I feel like it's just a choice. Do we want to encourage out-of-district contributions? And I don't think the $100 or the limit is solving it, or do we want to encourage greater in-district contributions?
Other than getting somebody more money, it doesn't meet any interest, any philosophical interest of the program. Doesn't do any good other than getting a candidate more money quicker in there. And I don't think it's necessary now that we have the progressive. Without it, I think you can make an argument. That's all it does, and I just don't think it's necessary.
I apologize, I just commented on the history of how we got to the progressive match. I didn't mean to raise the out-of-district issue.
Who are you?
So I think
So I don't think that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, so I don't know if people would like to,
I think we just move on.
We should
You can vote.
I think we can vote.
Progressive?
Yeah.
I think there are three issues. One is, are we going to have out-of-district match?
We
I voted that.
Right. Well, then we've got to decide whether we want to vote on it again or not, and we come back. Two is, should we have a progressive match? And if so, three, what's the level going to be? And I disagree a little with John, and it's purely public perception. Purely public perception. How high can we go before somebody says,
Enough.
It's crazy,
Enough.
yeah.
and, and that's, people will differ on that. But those are the three issues, I think, that have come out of this conversation.
I think there's like a related issue that came out of a previous conversation, unless I'm misremembering our hearings and the conversations we've had, which is like, do you only match a small contribution, or do you match a portion of a larger contribution? Which I think, again, if we're talking about really incentivizing small contributions and really, amplifying the voice of low-income New Yorkers who we want them to participate in democracy at the most grassroots level, then there would be an argument that you would only match a certain level of contribution and not this $2,500 or $5,000 contribution and a portion of that.
Can we go over, just so we can have it and we can do the numbers in our head? So I know that we have 1299 and 88. John, you actually proposed 1510, 988?
No.
No.
10, 10, 8, 8, but I could modify that, because apparently that came out to too high a number.
10.2,
Just 15 for the first $50. 15 to 1 for the first $50, and leave the others the same.
I mean, but right now, a $250 contribution is worth $2,300. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money for 250 to make it 2,300 without
That's
increase.
25.50.
Because you gotta add the 250 back in, right?
But that's the trade-off for eliminating all out-of-district a match for all out-of-district contributions. If you were to put that back in and reduce these numbers, you might get the same number with the out-of-district match.
So do you want to vote on anything? I'm trying to get a sense of what people want to do.
I think we have to make some decisions. I think, we've made several of them already. The question is there a motion to change any of our prior decisions? And then, if not, then where are we on this? We've never voted on this particular tiering.
I think there was a prior vote 5 to 4 to eliminate out-of-district matches.
Right.
Is anybody who voted to eliminate the out-of-district matches willing to change their vote so it's 5 to 4 the other way? I think the 4 were Kim, David, Denora, and me voted not to eliminate out-of-district matches. So if no one is changing their vote, then that remains the same.
Correct.
Well, I voted no on that vote because of the manner in which it came up that was contrary to the conversation we had in the prior meeting. In the prior meeting, I actually took the position that it should only be in district for the same reasons that are being stated now, and was convinced that the system couldn't work in the absence of some sort of out-of-district match. Given the progressive match, given the high contribution limit, given that participating or not, you have the same contribution limits. I don't really have any concerns with any of it, but I still think the out-of-district doesn't make sense to match, and that you're essentially creating a similar situation that's really not all that different from a few donors overwhelming the majority of small donors. You're just now transferring it to the many donors outside the district that aren't able to vote for a particular candidate to overwhelm the constituent within. So even if someone reversed their vote, I would not be in favor of an out-of-district match.
So that stands.
That stands.
Okay.
Let's move on.
And the second prior decision we had made was we're going to match the small portion of larger donations. I mean, you know,
We had to for administrative, I think.
right. Is there, you know, is there any desire to change that? I know, or is there, you know, I know there's some desire, but is there any broader desire to change that determination?
Thank you.
And one out, and one more out there. No, the third issue then is, do we want a progressive match?
Yes.
And then
I
the
think,
four-
I think the issue is how much.
And there was consensus on that. I think
Yeah.
the fourth issue is, what should the match be? And that's, you know, John has a suggestion. There's a suggestion here that I think we sort of, you know, bandied about before. So where are we on that?
Well, John just changed his suggestion, right? Didn't you, now it's 15, 10, 10, 8, 8?
Yeah, well, yeah.
15,
my
10,
decision
Yeah.
came
This
out.
isn't John's.
The
Yeah, yeah, no,
view
it
was
wasn't
that
John's.
that calculating, it came out to a over 10.2 match, so to make it more reasonable, I just limited the increase to the first 50 from 12 to 1 to 15 to 1. Which means that person who gave 50, they'd be mad, the amount that the candidate would get would be 750 rather than 600.
And you would keep the other levels the same?
Yes, yeah.
I think it's nice but unnecessary, and I think the perceptions are just, you know, I think we've sort of gone beyond,
About the perception.
you know,
No,
what,
12, 15 is a
you know,
lot.
what will be broadly acceptable. I think this is going to be a push as it is.
Well,
Make a-
let's- so
make a
let's
motion and we'll vote on it.
Yeah, vote on what's the existing 12,9988.
Okay, so that's a motion?
Is there a second?
Now, since I proposed 15, you should make the motion
Okay,
to stay with 12.
I move that we adopt a progressive match in which the first $50 is matched 12 to 1, the next $100 is matched 9 to 1, and the $100 after that is a match 8 to 1.
Yeah, I second it.
Okay,
Nay.
we haven't, do you want to discuss?
Sorry.
No?
I want to take time to actually think about it. I want to compare the 12 and the 15, and I want to see if there's even a middle ground, even a 13 or 14 if it works. So for me, I actually want to go through the numbers before I go
All right, so
anyway.
let's have some, spend a little time then, let them do that. Just so you know, if you go to the 9.2 match, on the 175,000 you need in an assembly primary race, you want to get taxpayer dollar, you need to raise $19,022, divided by $250 a person, if you use the most, it's 76 people is what you need, and you reach the cap. If you go to John Nona's proposal, you need $17,857 to raise. At $250 is 71.4. The difference is 5 people, 4.5 people is really what it comes down to at 250. Obviously, there'd be smaller, smaller amounts, there's more people, but it's not, we're not that dramatic in the difference. I worry about going to 9.8 and being called 10 times, because that's what 9.8 looks like in the grocery store. So, it's more 9.2, I think, is, practical. And I think frankly, I think it does the trick. In other words, I think it does what we need to have done, and I think it's something we can sell. It's actually 50% more already, think about it, than the 6 to 1. More than 50% more.
So there was a motion, it was seconded, there was a no.
She might be reconsidering that.
Yeah.
I'm doing numbers, guys. It takes me
Okay.
a while.
Take some time with
All right, I will have to take it after today.
it. Okay? She wants to take time on it. Okay,
Mhm.
take some
I'm
time
gonna
on
take
it.
time on it.
Okay.
Do we want to
We'll just-
continue voting? Because
no,
we
we should just-
started voting.
We did start voting?
Well, she did. She said no.
I think we can wait on this.
What would the group like to do? We can wait, we can continue, doesn't, we could do a straw poll, doesn't,
I don't see a reason, I mean, none of these votes are binding.
Right.
yeah.
If we can just settle it and move on, if one person's not ready on a particular issue, they can certainly voice their vote at a different time. It doesn't really have any bearing on anything.
Right,
It's
because
just
we're gonna
us
come back to it all anyway, yeah.
allowing to
it
establish
too
whether or
s-
not there's consensus to move on.
Is it too strenuous to ask that we be provided with the chart with each one of these levels, with the whole thing, with all the numbers, so we can look and compare?
Uh-huh.
Is
Yeah.
that too much before we vote? I
No,
mean,
that's
can
not,
we
that's
have
fair. I think that's fair, yeah. Look, we're going with a progressive, we just have to figure out the exact
Yes.
dollar amount, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, yes,
Was
what,
that a
yes.
vote?
No, my,
No.
I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing to,
You should not go to an auction, by the way.
right, clearly not. I'm agreeing to what Jay just said. I do want the numbers laid out, and if that's possible,
Well, that was what-
then I'll be perfect.
That was Crystal's great idea.
Oh, I'm taking it away from Crystal. Crystal, thank you for that great idea. I do want the numbers laid out.
Sure.
And Jay just said yes, it's
Thanks,
possible.
No, you didn't hear me argue.
Okay,
Do you think
so,
we can have that by the next meeting? Yes?
The next meeting is our last meeting.
That's right,
Wait,
that's right.
I think we
Is
need,
it determined we're not
No
meeting
meeting tomorrow?
We have the administrative stuff to do, I think we can get through that. I'm hoping that we can get some consensus on, that's the big nut, frankly, some of the stuff. You know, I will. I spoke to Karen out there, letting her know we're gonna, I think that's the big nut to tackle, and if we tackle it in, you know, an hour, two and a half, we got it done. Because everything else kind of flows from that, other than the minor ones, which I think are gonna be agreed upon pretty
We
easily.
all agreed upon 6-1 for the statewide races.
Yeah,
That's
that's
not
right,
changing.
that's right. But I think that, the administrative piece is the key thing.
You wanna dig into that
Yeah,
now?
I'll start digging into it, I go. Yeah, the little things, I mean,
I'm gonna
I
go
don't
to
think
the
we're gonna have
bathroom.
problems, small primaries, that's so logical.
I think the administrative part is.
Can we care?
Okay, we can take a break there.
So motion, oh no, we're starting with, number 6 is non-competitive elections. And I'm proposing that we track the New York City system, which provides that a candidate only gets 25% of the money unless they certify with some objective standards that they actually have a competitive election. And the law provides that a competitive election includes, among other things, somebody who's received certain endorsements, has been mentioned in news articles a certain number of times, it's 12 times, I believe, has been endorsed by membership organizations with more than 250 people, kinds of things that indicate that the candidate they're running against is in fact a credible, viable candidate capable of running a campaign. And I propose that we track the New York City law on this and have the same provision so that if there are non-competitive elections, people aren't getting excessive matches that are unnecessary.
I don't have that in front of me, but is one of the conditions raising a certain amount of money? Because I think that should be one. If they, I didn't think
Yeah.
it was. It is?
Can you-
I'm hearing whispers that it's not.
I provided this to you a few weeks ago. You did.
Yeah, he did.
I've got more copies.
Henry, can you explain, you're an incumbent, someone is challenging you, the determination is what?
Well, if you're the incumbent, whether you are going to receive full matching funds based upon the status of your challenger. If you're a challenger, the fact that you're running against an incumbent qualifies you for full matching funds.
So you may run into a situation where the challenger is getting more than the incumbent in that?
If the incumbent doesn't raise the money,
No, but I'm saying, you're being challenged.
right?
Someone makes a determination this isn't a real challenge. But the challenger
Meets the
is eligible, if they meet the threshold with money, they're eligible for the total amount. So you could run into a situation where the challenger is being, or at least eligible for full funding under the program, but the incumbent isn't?
Right, one of the qualifications should be any challenger that meets the threshold for financing becomes a real challenger.
Yes.
Yeah, and that would then allow the incumbent to draw down, regardless if they've been endorsed or been in the news or been anywhere. They could come from nowhere.
The participating candidate is opposed by any candidate who has received public fund payments for the covered election.
Or
Gets in default,
qualified for,
okay.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay,
It's in there.
okay.
Steve, do you have another copy? Thank you. You had it in your hand for me. Thank you.
I just couldn't remember. Yeah, I just couldn't
Yeah.
remember,
Yeah,
that's all.
you know, it works. Some candidates find it a nuisance. They actually have to file an affidavit to request the matching funds, but, you know,
It's smart.
it's a protection.
Yeah.
And,
It
yeah.
Is
also
it-
prevents straw candidates from just going in and allowing someone to game the system.
Just so I understand, because I'm not really familiar with how this works. Is it an ongoing review? You can seek a clarification or a review of it on an ongoing basis. So if the candidate starts to catch wind, starts developing, you go back and say,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah, in the old days, it was easy because the city didn't distribute money until August for September primary. But now they distribute earlier, and if you want to qualify, at some point, you're going to qualify and submit the affidavit. So, and as I said, this was circulated, this is right out of the city ad code.
I mean, anybody object to this? This is pretty consensus kind of stuff. Move on.
Okay, the second one was small primaries, and we circulated this one also.
Here, we pass a few around just in case people don't have it.
I only have a couple of these. For some reason, people took these more readily, but it's short. A candidate on the ballot in one or more primaries in which the number of persons eligible to vote totals fewer than 1,000 shall not receive public funds in excess of $5,000 for qualified campaign expenditures. And then there are some provideds, however, where it can, where, if the candidate is opposed in a primary election by a participant who is not subject to such limitations, or a non-participant who has spent or contracted or become obligated to spend in excess of $10,000, then they can receive the greater matching funds. Once again, you know, this is 705 right out of the city code, you know, because, you know, we do end up having a lot of small primaries in this state. In fact, many of them seem to be in the small parties. So this is, again, a limitation on distribution of matching funds where they just aren't necessary.
Is there any objection to this? No objection.
And once again, we should track
Yep.
the city code. And the third one I have is qualified campaign expenditures. I've got a couple copies. These were also, this is 3-704 of, right. This is what public funds, may be spent on. And and it says generally, public funds may be used only for expenditures by a principal committee to further the participating candidate's nomination for election or election. Blah, 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 blah. Such public funds may not be used for, and then it lists a bunch of things, such as an expenditure in violation of law, payments made to the candidate, spouse, domestic partner, child, et cetera, of the candidate, payments in excess of fair market value, expenditures made by a candidate after the candidate has been disqualified from the ballot, and it has a whole discussion on what disqualification is. Payments in cash may not be made by public funds, any contribution, transfer, or loan to another candidate, political committee, gifts, except buttons, brochures, and signs, expenditures to challenge the validity of a petition, expenditures made primarily for the purpose of advocating a vote on a ballot proposal as opposed to the candidate's own election, payments made by advances, and expenditures for the holding of office. Those cannot come from public funds. You can use your privately raised money for those things, as you can under the current law.
And you can defend a challenge with public money.
You can defend a challenge if you're challenged, but you can't spend public funds to initiate a challenge.
Right.
And once again, this is a protection on use of public funds. And this is, this has changed over the years, but
Right.
I think it's pretty solid now the way they've gotten to this point. It was a little different in the beginning.
This is kind of, I'm just curious. I know that there were some recent changes, maybe just at the FEC level, but I don't know if elsewhere, in terms of the expenditure of daycare expenses.
Childcare.
How is the city dealing with that in terms of their program?
They are permitting it.
They permit it, so use matchable dollars, and so under your definition, that's how this would work?
Yes.
State Board already has a formal opinion allowing childcare expenses to be used out of your campaign account anyway.
Yeah, I'm just wondering on
So we
the
may
matchability.
Make sure that's in the written, because I don't know that it was.
Okay.
Okay, anybody object to this? Yeah, consensus. All right.
Those are the three things that I had presented a few weeks ago.
Okay, so are we need a motion to adopt all of those?
No, those were by consensus.
Okay.
And we'll look at them in the final draft.
Yep.
So then next, we're on to administration and enforcement.
Denora, you had something?
And a proposal.
Yeah. I don't know if I was supposed to explain it or.
Yeah, please.
Perfect. So exciting topic to talk about administration and enforcement of the program that we're designing here. My recommendation, as folks received notice of last week, was to create a campaign finance board within the State Board of Elections to oversee all of campaign finance. Do I need to read this all out to you all? I know that Commissioner.
Can you give a
Sure.
description
For the public?
appointment
Sure.
for these two?
The Campaign Finance Board will consist of 5 members, no more than 2 of which from any party, and 1 who is not affiliated with any party. They will be appointed by a bipartisan panel of experts who will recommend a pool of candidates from which the governor and legislative leaders will each select 1 individual. The governor's pick will not be affiliated with any party. They must be New Yorkers, New York residents, and registered voters. No one who has been an elected office holder, candidate, officer of a political party or political committee, or a lobbyist as defined under New York state law, or an officer of a state agency in the last 5 years may serve on the board. I propose folding in and expanding existing compliance unit, including additional candidate liaisons to help candidates, similar to what they have at the city level. Hiring and firing cannot be for political reasons. Staff will be held to standards of conduct and promote ethics and nonpartisanships. I spell out auditing for both participating and non-participating candidates. In particular, all statewide candidates and up to half of legislative candidates are audited. Legislative candidates are audited by district, selected by lottery, weighted according to most recent past audit. And then I talk about the process for enforcement and how to deal with traffic ticket and, certain levels of violations. Include recommendations around penalties for civil violations and how to make sure that they have a regulatory authority to list out those in common violations. Create a reporting requirement that says that this new board would submit an annual report to the governor and legislative leaders about their activities, including recommendations for legislation to improve the program, which is similar to how it works at the city level, and then specify that the budget for this new board would be a minimum amount of funding for administration to be included in the annual budget with adjustments for inflation, and specifically provide that amount will not be decreased so as not to make the program null and void by lack of funding. And I know Commissioner Galvin proposed some amendments to clarify some of the things that I may not have enough expertise in the administration of what happens already at the state board. So happy to let her talk through those if that's helpful.
Just some of my comments you've all heard before. An agency within an agency doesn't necessarily work for administration purposes. The qualifications for one of the finance board members would effectively, in my opinion, eliminate too many people. Those with an expertise in the law would that have worked in it would all be eliminated. So I disagree with that point just a little bit. I agree with the funding. I agree with the compliance unit. I agree with allowing the State Board of Elections to impose fines directly. I agree with the traffic tickets. I agree with the auditing provisions, and in my opinion, the audit should be done on a continual basis with each filing, so you get to the end, you don't have to start fresh with each committee that's being audited. I disagreed with some of the proposals. I can't remember if it's in Commissioner Getchell's or not, that one of them says you choose a third of the legislative races and no more shall be chosen. I disagree with that. If you have the time, you should do as many audits as possible. You shouldn't let someone know just because they weren't picked from a lottery that they can do whatever they need to do. You should audit as much as you can, as quickly and effectively as you can. I mean, I'm a broken record on this topic. I know there's many out there that don't agree that the state board could effectively carry out the mission. I said, since the compliance unit has been funded and formed, we've done a great job. I think given the resources, which are critical, that we can continue to do so. I don't know if it were to come to the state board directly and the plan of the several commissioners, in my opinion, would be difficult to administer and wouldn't work. If you added 1 to 3 commissioners to the current set of commissioners that would rule only on public financing proposals, I think that would give you the non-deadlocking, take away the deadlocking hysteria that many seem to have. And I think those are the only differentiations I've had, but I've been a broken record on this topic, and I think that we could do it well. I think the testimony that co-executive directors Brem and Valentine gave laid it all out, and I would support their proposal.
Yeah, I would support that too.
What's that?
Commissioner Tacho, I think that, what you did was excellent work on that. I agree almost entirely with what Commissioner Galvin said. I think that the state board definitely can do this. I think I think that the whole nut comes into figuring out that hearing body that deals with these issues. I think that everything.
Right, and for people that don't understand, one of the recommendations in the state board testimony was anything that a candidate or a committee would like to appeal goes to a hearing panel made up of outside individuals to listen and effectively rule on the issue in a timely fashion. So I can't recall the number, 3 or 5. I think it was 5, perhaps.
It was 5.
And so how they get chosen and by whom would be a critical component. But there is that outside entity that all of these discrepancies or problems or questions would go immediately to. And then that would allow the regulatory process and the opinions and things of that nature, the review and the authorization of funding release to come from the people that do the day-to-day work on a day-to-day basis.
But this outside body, there's one proposal is to take the existing commissioners and add 1 to 3 more. So it wouldn't be outside, it would be 4, the existing commissioners plus 1 to 3 additional people.
No, that was my comment. I believe that the state board official testimony said a hearing panel.
So that would be closer to what Denora has proposed. Yeah.
Right, only
Which
they
are-
wouldn't
which are-
sit in the board proper like a
Right,
whole,
they'd
right.
be independent, as you said.
Right,
from the board.
independent,
Yeah.
right.
When I started this consideration, I was convinced it had to be an entirely outside body, an entirely new entity. And I thought the state board testimony on the whole was very persuasive. And I divide the process into 2 parts. One is if you permit me to say, the mechanical part of it, which is, recording of contributions and expenditures and filing and auditing and all those things. And I'm absolutely convinced that ought to stay in the state board, because to take it out with all of the other committees that exist is just too complicated. I differ with the state board because I think Part of it is to keep it simple, stupid. And given the time frames we work with, and we've seen this with the city law, decisions have to be made quickly. So that after the mechanical stuff is done, there has to be one entity that makes the decisions. My suggestion, and it's, you know, it's a suggestion and very similar to yours, is you start with the 4 commissioners and you add 3 other people. How are the 3 people chosen? That's always a key. One of the things we do in the law is we say, you know, the party that's gotten the most votes gets 1, the party that's gotten the second most votes gets 1. And in this case, we could have the legislative leaders of the party that got the most vote get 1, and the legislative leaders of the party. So that's the simple part. Then you got 1 left. Now, you know, the 1 left could be 1 chosen by the 4 legislative leaders and the governor jointly. I mean, I got chosen by 3 of them, and somehow they managed to reach agreement. But, you know, 5 of them get together and, you know, and they choose the third, you know, the 3rd member. There has to be an odd number of people. But that board gets the recommendations from the staff on violations, penalties, there should be a schedule, all those things. That board should have the authority to impose and enforce penalties. That board should not have to rely on the Enforcement Council for anything. They should have the authority to administer this program and control how it works. The City Campaign Finance Board does that, and it works tremendously well.
I would agree that the board proper should have the ability to fine, and I would also agree that there are certain circumstances where there may be cause for a deviation, either an exasperation or a lowering, but those 2 would have to be approved by the board proper before being imposed, because there could be extenuating circumstances that may require an up or down deviation.
That's why that board gives the opportunity for a hearing, and very few do it, but they argue that this penalty is too high, or this violation is de minimis, or whatever, but the board makes the final decision as to whether a violation is incurred and whether a penalty should be imposed. And they have the power to enforce that penalty, the way the board uses, you know, the way the, you know, the Board of Elections did. One other piece is, I think that if it's done that way, the Board of Elections has to create a separate budget for the campaign finance program, which goes to the legislature untouched by the
Like the
executive.
City Finance Board.
The way the City Campaign Finance Board does it. They propose their budget. It goes right to the City Council. The executive can comment on it. They never do, but they can.
He might.
And, right, but then it's up to the legislature. And in the history of the city, they've always accepted the budget. My only disagreement on the other piece, Denora, is that rather than an annual report, you either do a report each cycle, which is either every 2 years or every 4 years. The City Campaign Finance Board does it every 4 years. It gives them several months to put it together. They write their report. They propose legislative changes. And then there are hearings at the City Council. And a lot of those proposals get changed. But you can't do it on an annual basis because, you know, the board isn't doing it annually.
Operating, yeah.
To Denora's point as well, I mean, we have a small training unit now that does hundreds of training seminars throughout the state for CLE credit and CPE credits. Obviously, that would have to be expanded and exclusively towards this. But there has to be, again, liaisons, campaign liaisons, as you suggested, a number to satisfy the committees and the candidates to walk them through it. We're not a gotcha. It shouldn't be gotcha. It should be compliance. But one other thing that I learned from the 2014 pilot program that we did that people need to pay attention to, in my opinion, is that it becomes very difficult when you tell the State Board of Elections to work with the Comptroller's office in a certain time frame to release funds to a certain account. So if it could be structured in such a way that the reviewers do it, they qualify, it's checked, it's approved, it's vouchered for lack of a better word, then it flips over to the paying entity, who then shall take the responsibility to get it to the candidate and the candidates committee. That way, there's no delay because the State Board of Elections can't find something or whatever. The Comptroller's Office is better at spending and getting money out the door, certainly, than an agency such as us. So, because last time we had to call them and create up this electronic transition and all these things, and it just didn't work, especially in the 8 months that we had to do it. So if we can find a way to just cut it off, we say, Jay Jacobs, you're good, and, then within 48 hours, the Comptroller's Office, we give them whatever paperwork they need, and then they cut the check or transfer it into the funds. That's a critical piece that people lose a lot in transition, because two bureaucracies fighting over money is not something we need.
And that should be in the statute that says,
Right.
once the board approves disbursement of funds, they shall be dispersed within 72 hours or whatever the number is.
Excluding holidays and
But I would
weekends.
even put in the controller, just
Yeah.
to make it clear.
Yeah.
The controller shall disperse the
Controller's
funds.
Office and whatever fund is dedicated to the payment of
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
Separate
Right.
the two, that way it happens.
Yeah.
The CFB budget includes a budget for administration and a budget for matching funds. They figure out what the maximum is and they request it, so it's allocated but not dispersed. So it's there, the controller has the funds, city controller, state controller, and once the board says yes,
So something similar to that, because otherwise, the back and forth
Right.
and the requirement of another receipt or this or that, once we've already done it, is too difficult to administer.
and your point about the training staff emphasizes why there has to be a separate budget, because it has to include those staff people.
Right, and it's gonna
gotta
need
be-
auditors and more
Yeah.
reviewers as well.
And it's got to be adequate.
I know there's a lot of naysayers out there that don't believe the state board can do it, and I assure you, I will be there, and we will, if it comes to us, we will effectively carry out this as we're supposed to.
We'll have to build you into the statute then.
You can build me right into the statute, I'm not going anywhere.
And one other point, I would like to say thank you, since lobbyists can't be on this board, and I lobbied last year for automatic voter registration. I'm not going to be able to do it, and I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know, we can always carve out an exception for you.
Wow.
So,
Can I ask a clarifying question on I appreciate your suggestion around reporting. I don't know the answer to this question I'm asking, so I'm being serious. Is it that are elections, two-year cycle elections, more competitive in the presidential year than they are in the non-presidential year? Because you might want to think about reporting and having reporting requirements pegged to the legislature and a different one to
Well,
the
I think there'll be
governor.
more reporting requirements for the public financing program, and generally you see, not so much the presidential as much as the gubernatorial really
Okay, that's
brings
what I was
out
asking.
people at a local level.
Okay.
But in the pilot program and in the bill draft that I looked at, there's 2 added reports, and then an ability, if someone wants to file again to get funds released, more funds released once they're in that system, they can, file on a Monday, and it has to be reviewed and whatever by a Thursday or whatever.
So by the same token, then, for the purposes of this board issuing a post-election report, if you will, it would be on the gubernatorial 4-year cycle versus on the 2-year cycle?
I would think so, because you'd want to cover the
Both.
statewide elections. I
Right.
mean, that's, you got a lot of small problems with small elections, you get the same small problems and a lot of big problems.
Are they
with the
different
bigger
problems? I don't know.
elections. Yeah, so it's,
Plus, with the ramp up, we haven't touched effective dates, but,
It's
Oh, that's
coming.
next on the
It's coming.
agenda.
oh,
We're going to start it next week.
you're gonna shoot down the board now? Don't you dare.
Wow.
Okay, David.
I was just gonna say with respect to the board, obviously, budgets are always difficult, money's always tight. The way the enabling legislation deals with it, it says 100 million allocated annually to the program. We've interpreted that to be inclusive, rather than trying to create something where we're demanding or requiring a certain budget aspect outside of the 100 million to peg that certainty of funding within the 100 million. If the program runs over, that's someone else's problem to deal with. But in terms of administration and ensuring that you have the necessary funding, I just don't think doing some other proposal with respect to the budget is going to carry much weight. If they don't want to do it, they don't do it. If you do it within the confines of this statute, within the funding that they've already agreed to, you may actually be able to come up with a system that locks it down a little bit more securely.
Whatever locks it down, I mean, I think that's, you know, essential.
So are we going with Denora's proposal for membership of this
Right.
board?
I think we, if I could, on the board makeup, I think the makeup is critical, and I think we gotta look at various proposals that, not the makeup of what we've discussed, I'm talking about the hearing.
The hearing board,
office,
yeah,
right.
yeah, that's
I mean, we
what
have a
it is.
couple of things that lay out there. Right now, just to refresh our memory, the 4 members of the State Board of Elections, 2 Republican and 2 Democrat,
Correct?
and who appoints them? How does that happen?
The governor appoints them.
Well, technically, the governor appoints them. You have to give the legislative leaders propose a name, the Republicans, and 2 names, and he picks one. Accordingly, it's the same with the Democratic. And then the party chairs, it's my understanding, pick the other 2, and only 1 name needs to be submitted. So right now, and I'm not speaking out of turn, Commissioner Spano, we view as the governor's appointment. Commissioner Kellner, we view as the Assembly and Senate Majority's appointment. Commissioner Kaczynski is Colvin Flanagan, and Commissioner Peterson is the state chairman, Republican state chairman.
Okay, just so I'm just familiar with how that goes, and then the other question is how, if we did it that way, the way you suggested, and added 3 others, how those would get picked, would be of interest, I think, to make sure that we have something that's nonpartisan in essence, or bipartisan.
Yeah,
Multi-partisan,
You
I
have,
think.
you have it in your comments.
Yeah, right. I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to, there are certain aspects that I also put in my comments that I'll just reiterate here, whether they make it into the final proposal or not, with regard to regulations and advisory opinions and things like that. I think part of the majority has to be the additional members that are there just for the public financing purpose. I don't think you can have the current, they're all watching, I don't think you're gonna have the current 4 commissioners outvote the 3 on regulations. I think you need a combination of the public financing specific people and the current,
You need a majority, including at least 2 of the.
including at least 2,
Commissioners.
correct.
That gets pretty complicated, and that's why I favor Denora's approach of 5 independent members chosen from a list that's recommended to the party leaders and the governor.
Yeah, I think it, however it comes out, I don't think it, it's, I just think it has to be,
The only problems there
inclusive,
are
yeah.
they paid?
yeah,
That has to be determined.
right.
At what, obviously what level, and it's difficult to schedule. We're getting used to the 4 we've had now, we've had them for several years, and some video in, and we're getting good at that. But as long as the 5 don't have to interact with the 4, because getting 9 together would be,
Yeah.
it's like us.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a logistical nightmare. Yeah, here we are.
yeah, and they should get paid at least as much as we do.
Yeah, they should.
The current commissioners get paid an annual salary, right?
They do.
It was
It's
30,000.
25,000 or something, yeah.
I thought it was 30.
That's the city, when it works out. The state commissioners haven't had a raise in 74. I'm not lobbying for them, I'm just saying that.
Well,
Yeah.
we have no power.
Well, I think we have to come up with an answer on that last little nut, I think, which we can think about.
So those, the things that we're thinking about is how those people would be, the additional people would be appointed, who would appoint them?
Exactly.
But also, would we be deciding whether or not they'd be paid positions, or
Well-
would we have to decide that too?
I think it kind of, yeah, I think we have to decide
Yes.
that too, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think that goes along with how much work they have to do,
And the city's paid, is that clear?
Are they paid?
I'm asking.
Yeah, they're paid a per diem, I think
It's
That could be
300
like the city board down there, they're paid, when they get called in, they get
Right.
paid a certain
It's
amount,
Right.
yeah.
300 per diem, but not exceeding 30,000.
and I'm not sure what the campaign finance board is, but it's similar.
It is similar.
Do you remember?
So something like that.
But
however
Okay.
that,
That board will meet very frequently in the. 8
Initially.
weeks, 6 to 8 week, well, when they do rules and reg, but in the, like the 8 weeks before an election, when, you know, the final monies are dispersed. They meet like once a week or something, and then, you know, for months, they'll meet once every 2 months, you know, sort of between elections, so it's, you know,
yeah, the state board commissioners are more routine
we
monthly
meet
or,
every month,
or-
but this would change.
right,
If we include them, this would change their schedule, so.
okay. Sorry.
Good.
Sorry to them, making them
sorry
meet,
to them.
yeah.
Do we want to bring up the last item, is the commencement date? I think the state board had its, had its recommendation, I agree with it.
2022?
No, it starts after the 2022 election.
Well, it starts, yeah, but
November
that would mean,
starts- Right. The fundraising starts.
November 15th, 2022,
2022,
after the election, which means it's going to be 24
Right.
legislative and 26
Gubernatorial,
gubernatorial.
yeah.
Well, it says candidates can participate, this is the, what you circulated, I think.
No, I circulated this, right?
Will begin implement on November 15, 2022. That's different than I think was proposed by
Denora.
Denora, which was,
Yeah.
so why
Which was what?
2022?
That would
Well,
be in
Starting with
place for the 22 cycle.
election, not after the
Right.
2022 election cycle.
because the 2022 election starts January, right? The
I
cycle,
think it's about
Yeah.
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
6
Starts right away.
weeks, yeah.
Yeah, so we have to get, your time, and listen, I'm following what the state board's
I mean, 6 weeks,
recommendation was. Yeah,
That was their recommendation,
yes,
right?
it was their recommendation. And it makes sense, I mean, we have to set up technology.
Yeah, there's a lot of
computers,
work goes into
and-
creating this.
And an
bureaucracy.
interaction, the relationship with the controllers over all the payment systems, everything, there's just a
You've got to
huge
adopt rules.
rules and
AP
regulations.
You know, the APA won't permit you to adopt the rules within
Without
that
putting them out for
timeframe.
comment, et cetera.
So I have a question, discussion, and I know you're all gonna get mad at me, but. So 2022, if we started in 2022, why is there a delay for the statewide? Because even though the statewide elections are not taking place, we all know that statewide candidates are fundraising, so they're in a cycle. So why can't everyone start at the same time?
They are.
They are.
But, so
Can't-
it's,
it
it's, the
can't-
rules are taking place for the fundraising aspect.
Yeah, but the statewide candidates are gonna be 2022, and you can't get up and ready for that. So it has to be 2026.
Okay.
But there's no reason for the
But we
assembly.
can get ready for the Senate and the Assembly by 2022.
No,
No.
2024.
So both would be 2024?
No, well, there's no governor's election
Statewide,
24.
2024.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 2024 and 2026.
yeah, we're right mid-cycle now,
You
so it
can't-
makes it,
Yeah, you got candidate raising money already.
It's kind of fair.
Yeah,
So we want to say that it begins for ledge 2024, statewide
Right.
2026?
right.
Okay, not
Okay.
2022?
No, the program commences where you can begin raising money and doing things on November the 15th, 2022, for the 2024 election. You can't do it in 2020 because we don't even have the regulations ready,
course.
by next month, 2 months from now.
November 15,
And the board
2022, you could
Yeah.
start getting contributions to qualify.
That's right, that's right.
And the board has to start functioning once this is adopted, because they have to put all
we have to put everybody, we have to, we
all the
would,
protocols in
And you have to
place.
hire.
we have to get a the biggest thing would be to upgrade the software. We just rolled it out. It's very user-friendly, but to add the various components in. And just one clarifying point on that. Reading some of the things, the added commissioners, it's my understanding, based upon the state board's testimony, that the board proper hires and fires the staff. And is anyone seeing that the 5 or the 3 commissioners control various parts of the board staff, or no?
No, you've got a compliance unit, for
Right.
instance, that exists. That's gonna just be built out to do a
That's the
lot
way
more.
I was
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah,
it.
and I look at it the same. I don't think that, I think the hearing officers are all about making the determinations when there's an appeal or some complicated issue.
That board, the panel of
That panel,
people.
whatever that
Right,
panel is and however that panel is constituted, and whatever that panel is paid, that's the panel that deals with that.
Right.
But other than that, the board is running the board, right?
I'm hopeful.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what
just,
it's
I'm just being clear, because we do have varying, and as Henry said, the natural finding authority should come to the board with a schedule set out and regulations and deviations, so, the issue of the current enforcement council would remain where it currently remains, and that this new program, the board will deal with any specific finding or an ad hoc referral or something of that nature,
That's what I'm suggesting.
based upon the recommendations from the staff.
If we deal with the enforcement of the public finance.
Right,
Right,
right.
right.
Okay, that's just for clarification, thank you.
Yeah, pretty much the way it was presented by the two commissioners, Valentine and Brem.
Yeah, we're just making sure, because
I know. Yep. Can't take yes for an answer.
How are we gonna make a decision on the board?
Well, I think we have to, I want to look at different models. I want to see, I haven't seen yet what's out there. I'm interested in this concept that Commissioner Galvin.
I don't know why
presented.
you couldn't do something as easily, well, not as easily, but, I mean, certainly the governor, the Senate and Assembly majority leaders, and then the Republican leaders, they get 1 versus 2 added to the 4 that already exist, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Keep it
But then,
simple.
yep, keep it simple. But I think we're coming very close to what,
Then the
Minority
complete makeup
vote.
of the board would be 4 to 3.
Or it could be 3 to 1, I mean, it's.
Or if there were 5 separate ones, it could be, 4 to 1 or 3 to 2 or some hybrid of, I mean, obviously to the victor go the spoils, so.
The city can't like finance board, they actually has a working families party person on.
my
Well,
hope,
that brings up a whole other host of issues.
save that for another day.
So what's the next step on this, just so I'm clear?
We just
Because
have-
there are
we
two
just-
different, at least
Yeah,
two
I
different
think we
approaches
just
here.
have to, again, I think, just have to think about it a little bit, and then just as a last piece, come up with this at our last meeting and just nail it down. I think
How
we're
about
very close.
how about if only because I'm more familiar with how the inner workings of the board work, put something together based upon yours and what we've all
Good,
talked about
okay.
and circulate it around,
Good.
and we'll,
Yes.
Please.
we'll go.
Thank you.
That'd be very helpful. That'd be very helpful.
Right,
Yep,
alternative 1, alternative 2.
Thank you.
Okay.
Terrific.
Good. I think we're set.
So I think that will sort of, that concludes today's meeting in principle, but, so I don't think we need to meet tomorrow. But I do think that we do need to discuss a schedule, and if we're thinking about December 1st is our deadline. And I know we talked about meeting the 25th, although that is a challenge for some of us, as we've also discussed. Hoping that we can have something
In writing before.
yes,
Substantially
Yes.
before then.
substantially before
Substantially
then,
before
because
then.
I don't think we can
Right.
do
And
it
the two,
in
right, and
24
the 2
hours.
issues, big issues that we didn't resolve here, the governor's contribution limit and
Right.
the progressive match.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
and the board, right, because we
And
haven't
the
talked.
board, and the
that's
board
still-
issue.
Well, and the board, but at least we worked on that,
And
and
if
we have
we're gonna-
something to do. The
And-
rest of them, I think, they can't
we
really
will
do a
be-
bill draft without those filled
We
in.
will be, I will be sending around something on threshold and fusion and
Well,
those items.
you know,
I'll be sending that around.
Let me
I-
address that.
An
Oh.
idea too.
Let me address that. So, we meet on the 25th. We've got these 3 big issues we gotta decide. We don't have any time after that, because 3 days after the 25th is Thanksgiving. So the 28th, 29th, 30th, and the 1st are all days when not much can get done. And I'm concerned about last-minute things. So I wanna make a motion right now that we agreed not to make any recommendations regarding fusion voting. I think we should take that off the table now. We might have some other issues we want to deal with, but I think we should take that off the table now and not let it distract us and get emails over the next month about fusion voting and people
2 weeks,
writing to us.
2 weeks.
Or 2 weeks.
So we should schedule a meeting for next week, if we can agree on that.
I'm prepared to meet next week if we can resolve that issue and some of these other issues next week. I'm prepared to meet. I don't know what everybody else's schedule is.
That's fine. Can we go to Syracuse?
I
I'll
prefer
go
to
to
meet
Albany.
tomorrow. Can we resolve them by tomorrow?
Well, I think like for me, I'd like to see your proposal, and I don't mean that, I'm not trying to put.
Oh, I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about, I'll get it to you within the next 3 days, but I'm talking about these big issues that they can't draft a bill until they know them.
Well, they can draft the bill without them, but yes, they can't draft a complete bill. I'm actually just looking at. it,
Hopefully not
trying to look at a
redacted.
calendar, thinking about.
Yeah, I'll open up the calendar too.
John, well, I just want to make this clear.
It's a
While
Sunday.
I
It's a
am
Sunday, yeah.
predisposed to discussing, taking certain things off the table,
I'm free next week.
I'm not voting to take anything off the table until, I get some agreement on what's going to be on the table. So that's not a reasonable approach.
I made the motion, if it's not seconded,
You know.
fine, if no one wants to vote on it, but I want to go on record saying we should take fusion voting off the table now.
Someone second.
I appreciate it, and I assure you that what I would do is, I will get you a proposal I think that you can live with.
So
Where's the second?
I'm just gonna ask the audience to please refrain from shouting out. So let's talk about if we can, or do we wanna meet at a different time, or
What day is good for you next week?
Any
no day
is
is good for me, but
good.
that's okay.
let me go- I'm in the wrong damn calendar.
What do you think, schedule-wise? I just think we can't do all of this on the 25th.
Yeah.
Let's do, I will tell you that the dates that I've got, just so, I have a calendar,
Okay, I'll
but,
get my calendar up.
yeah, I've got, if I had to do it on Monday the 18th, I could. If I had to do it on Tuesday, I've got a dinner up here in Westchester on Tuesday I've got to be at, but I could be during the day on Tuesday the 19th. I cannot do it on Wednesday the 20th. I could do it if I had to on Thursday the 21st.
I'm just gonna have the video conference on.
Yeah, so,
I can do it Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday.
you know,
Me
so,
too. I
How many
can't do it
people can do
Tuesday,
it?
I can do it Monday or Thursday.
How many people can do it on Monday?
I can't.
Either in person or by phoning in?
Probably do
These
some
so
portion.
hard.
phone in.
Some portion.
Yeah.
And then Thursday, because John can't,
Thursday?
Thursday?
I can't do Thursday.
Can't Thursday?
I could do
I'm on a
Thursday.
flight.
I can do
Um,
Thursday.
That doesn't mean, you can do it without me.
Yeah, I can do Friday the
I can do
22nd.
Friday
if you-
too, I can do
if you-
Friday
if you
too.
I
wanted
can
to.
do,
No?
I can do Friday, that's,
No,
I can't do
mileage.
Friday.
okay.
So Monday, is morning better, or, I don't think this is a 6-hour meeting. I think we have a couple major decisions to make, but it's a 2-hour meeting. Is morning better than afternoon better than morning?
Morning is better.
Morning?
Monday, the 18th we're talking about? Yeah.
You know, due to the open meetings law, it all has to be webcast and all that.
Yep, we can't be phone, it has to be video conferenced.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can
So
set
let's
up.
keep it for the 25th.
I'll see
if
what
it's
I
too
can set up,
complicated.
guys.
Did
We
Thursday
don't
fall
have enough
off?
time,
We gotta
Yeah,
do some
we
of this
gotta
stuff.
do something before, earlier.
or
Yeah,
take the vote now.
What I can also do is, I can also
Next
do
week.
this, is get, I can get,
Can we
push
vote
on the.
and those out, on the outliers, give their vote at some other point?
I
No?
think we'll have to know. I think what we'll do is this,
They'll give me dirty looks.
I'll get onto the legal staff about a draft also, because I think the most important thing is you get to see a draft.
Yeah.
And then, I know that Commissioner Galvin in particular and Commissioner Berger wanted to go over that and make sure that there were issues and maybe put you in direct contact, or you have to contact yourself with folks drafting these things.
Yeah, only because inadvertently there could be an
I
error
know.
that could change the whole flavor of the thing.
No, I agree with you.
We've seen that a
We
lot
need-
at the
We need to have a
legislature.
solid draft. I agree with that.
So are we gonna try to set something up?
I'm gonna try, I will try, I'll
What
get to
time?
everybody.
10 to 12?
10 to
or so?
12, something
Yeah.
like that? Is that?
So the 18th tentatively from 10 to 12?
Yeah, that's what we try to do,
Okay, I'm gonna do 9 to
okay?
12, just in case.
I will see.
Wherever we can get it set up.
We're gonna get set up, I'll find it.
And some of us might video in, we'll just see.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna need several videos.
Yeah, there'll be several
Several.
videos.
We'll need a
We'll be
big-
sitting here with
Shouldn't we
a
just come
bunch
back
of,
tomorrow?
monitors.
Well,
Right.
No, we need a little bit of break.
Yeah, I know. Okay, and thanks to you, John, for arranging this
Yeah,
place.
this is great.
Thank you.
Sorry I couldn't bring coffee in, but we had to.
You did great, it was great.
Thank you.
Kim?
Is the BOE set up for video conferencing? Don't you do that with your commissioner?
Yeah,
With people,
the only one in Albany is Dave.
you're close.
Okay. Can't go to
You
the
gotta be
Bronx.
in Westchester in the afternoon. You go to Albany in the morning.
I'm not going there.
That's a rough one in the morning.
Maybe in Westchester,
I gotta-
maybe I could do a video.
I'll dial
conference
in.
and you can come to-
I think only
Maybe-
one,
we
how
got-
does it work? Only one person has to be, how many people have to be on video? Some can be on phone. No, but I mean,
You
the
can't be on the
rules.
phone. You can't, your
can't
vote
be-
is not valid if you're on the phone. It has to be video. You have to be seen.
Oh.
Yeah.
Your vote is not valid on the phone. No.
You can vote on video. If people could show up at your office where you're on video.
A crowd that's chanting at us. Okay, I'll work on something and get something out pronto, all right, to everybody. Try to
We're
figure
not
this out.
meeting tomorrow.
No. All right? Thanks, everybody. Yeah, please.